So I have fun updating news about stolen vehicle, Mike.
Do tell.
I put a deposit on a new one.
All right. When do you get it?
So after all the fun moving money around stuff is done, I can be done with this whole stolen vehicle thing, which will make Joe happy.
Yeah, that's never fun to deal with. Glad you're getting to the end of it, though.
Yeah, which was, I think it was last time we had to move recording because I was having a fun fight with insurance. So thankfully, we're not doing that anymore, and we can move on with life. So there you go. Fun update on Joe's life.
When do you get your new vehicle? I know that they are a little bit harder to find at the moment.
That might be an understatement. So the place I'm getting it from is actually they ship them in from out of state. Like they're buying them from saltless states is the way that they put them because, in Minnesota, we like to salt our roads. So every vehicle in the road up here has fairly significant amount of rust after about 6 months of them existing. And these don't really have that problem at all. So that's a benefit there. And I'm grateful for that. But anyway, they're buying them out of state and bringing them in because they don't exist up here. That's how it goes.
All right.
But basically, pay a premium if you want a vehicle at all. That's the name of the game right now.
Yeah, I know someone who got in an accident with a minivan and they got the insurance sorted out, but they could not find a replacement minivan. So they had to actually buy a new one, and it's not going to be delivered for several weeks, and insurance is no longer paying for a rental vehicle. So they're a family with 4 kids and down to a single sedan.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, right now I've got 2 Nissan Altimas. One is mine, the other is a rental. And when you're used to having a Suburban, a Nissan Altima is less than ideal.
Yeah.
Just not my preference of exciting vehicles to own. So anyway,
especially
we don't need
in the winter in Minnesota.
Yeah, we don't need to belabor on about vehicles. But anyway, fun update on Joe's life. So let's do some follow up. I have a couple of them here. One of them was do better.
How's that going?
I think that's okay. I think I'm doing better. I don't have any idea, but I will continue to do my best to do better. I love that you put it in the outline
Nice.
like that.
I probably captured it that way with the intention of going back and updating it with context from the last episode, but I didn't do that.
It was a good one. It was entertaining to see it like that. Anyway, basically, I'm paying attention to how I operate in general and trying to just evaluate emotions, the actions that come from those, and what can I do to be a better person with those. So that's kind of what we're at. But it's more of an observational task than anything. So there's that one. The second one, which is way more fun to talk about, is to work on this task management system diagram. And I sent you a link to this and a pictures in the outline. You can share this if you want in the outline, Mike. It's probably going to keep changing, though, because even as I was capturing the screenshot to share it with you, I realized there's a whole layer of things I don't have in here. So it's probably going to change over time. Didn't even realize how much was going to go into this. What I have here is fairly basic, and will get even more advanced and complex over time. So there's that. Hopefully it makes sense.
Makes sense to me. It's too long to share, apparently, in the chat because there's a 200 character limit in YouTube, but it'll be in the show notes for the published episode. And I'm not surprised that this ended up being more complicated than you thought it was going to be. That's kind of the point, I guess. It's very much in line with the process for the personal retreat stuff that I do. It sounds really simple. And then you sit down and you're like, oh, I'm just going to ask these 3 questions all day. Well, I don't need all day to do that. And you can rationalize I'm just going to do this quick. And then you get into it and you're like, there is no way I can do this quick. But there is a lot of value and clarity, I think, that comes from doing this. So what was the big takeaway from you from putting this diagram together? Is there any sort of way that this helped you in your day-to-day workflow?
As far as helping me day to day, I I don't know that it's had anything major. There's been one minor thing that came about because if you look at this diagram, one of the things that you'll see is there's a task list database in it, which is like your central stock if you want to use the system terms. And then whenever I complete things, it goes into this success bucket. Basically, I got it done. Yay, Joe did a thing. However, when it hits that point, it's very common that whenever that task is done, I need to communicate that it's done in some form, whether that's to my wife, to somebody I work with, or whoever requested the task to be done. I need to let my staff know what the new protocol is on something. Like, these are all things that I have to do after a task is complete. And I've learned that that is actually a very critical step in knowing how to do that well. Because if I don't do that, like sub meta task that goes with it, if I don't do that one really well, if you notice in the chart, it is usually communicated via email, but then that email bucket often generates new tasks. So if I don't do that one well, it automatically leads to compound tasks, as I've started calling them, because I did the one thing and now it's led to a whole new realm of tasks that are starting to come back to me that I have to watch out for. So that is less than ideal, but it means that it's at least exposed a potential pain point that I'm not sure I realized was a pain point. Like, I knew this was a thing that if I didn't do this well, it was potentially going to lead to even more work for me. But I didn't realize how immediate that was until I saw it on this graph. So
Sure.
be smart with how I communicate that something's done, basically.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And maybe is something that you don't have to deal with in certain situations, but you do with others. And really the beauty of putting this diagram together, I guess, is realizing in what scenarios you need to do that. Because in a typical task management diagram, you get to the end, you check the task is completed, and you think that's the end, but it's not in some cases. So cool. Are you glad you did it?
Well, I'm still working on it because, like I said, there's like a whole layer of things I've realized are not here. And that's primarily, like, again, if you glance at this picture, and I'm sorry for those of you who are alive, you can't see this, but there's like a whole layer of like when things come out of a task list, I feel like it needs to go into like this is my work time. So it needs to go into that work time because sometimes it goes back to a task list from that. Like, it doesn't actually finish. It's not a one-to-one. I don't start a task and then it's done. So it can like create this loop within that. But then that work time can also be eaten up by like all the meetings and phone calls and stuff that's on this as well. So it's got like a time element that needs to be in this as well in order to really get a clean picture of it. But that's a whole nother layer of complexity that's going into this. Thus, Joe's not done, I guess. And I didn't realize that until we were getting ready to record. So yeah, this is more of a work in progress than I thought.
Yeah, you got a good start on it, though. And I love the fact that you have one of these from the task list to something being deleted. And the definition is waiting too long.
Yes.
The Napoleon approach.
Totally.
Just ignore it for a while, see if it goes away.
Yes. Yep. And that's, I should maybe try to figure out if there's ways to, I wouldn't be able to do this, but if there's ways to make the lines bigger based on how many things happen in each of those, that would be kind of cool. But I don't think I have the information to make those accurate by any means. But I would love to know how many things get deleted because I waited too long to work on them. In some cases, that's a good thing. Like, I waited a day instead of responding immediately, and thus they fixed it themselves. Like, to me, that's a success. But
Yep.
yes, waiting too long can be good or bad. Just saying.
Right. And for the folks who have downloaded this episode and did not hear the pre-show banter, you built this in Obsidian, which is awesome.
Yeah, I used the whole mermaid graphing thing that's now built into Obsidian to make this. And then it's in a spot, and I can reference that chart from other places within Obsidian, which is kind of nice. So, yeah, which means it's forever a living thing.
Very cool. So this is a whole tangent that we're not going to get into today, but I'm just going to throw this out there. I have been rethinking everything in my task management workflow. I showed you a big stack of fountain pen friendly index cards that I'm playing with. I'm still using the notebook, And I am also playing around with all of the possible task management plugins inside of Obsidian. So we can come back to that at another point, but there's some really cool stuff you can do.
Yeah, I've got a lot of things that are task-based in Obsidian and have like queries that show up on my daily note. So maybe you and I should get together at some point and just nerd out over this.
We should make it a Bookworm live stream.
That would be easy to do too.
Seed planted. Okay, I can see the
Why do you
gears
gotta
turning
do
in
that?
Joe's head. Let's move on now.
That was mean. That was really mean.
Sorry.
What are we doing here today? Oh yeah, we read a book. Let's talk about that book. Thanks
Well,
for
first
that, Mike.
I have to chime in on my action item.
Oh,
Which
that's right.
Is a typical Mike impossible to measure action item.
We like
Never
those.
allow anyone to be humiliated in my presence. This was from the previous book that we covered, going back to your your do better action item that we never really explicitly defined in this episode. We covered Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, and it was all about naming emotions. And one of them that stood out to me was humiliation. And I recall this action item was really just a perspective I want to have as I go into different meetings and encounters with other people is always allow the other person to save face, basically. And I did not have any chances to practice this directly the last couple of weeks, but I will say I've been in meetings where things have started going in a specific direction, and I have noticed that like my antenna go up because I kind of foresee a situation where if this really goes completely off the rails, how this person might feel cornered. And that's kind of what I feel. That's what I mean by humiliated.
Sure.
It's like they were trying to explain something and people kept pushing and they weren't ready to give a justification for it. So they're just like grasping at words, and then it's almost like you're trying to trap them, that sort of thing. And I could see stuff kind of heading that way, and I try to head it off at the pass. And it never got to the point where it was really needed for me to jump in and do something to intervene. But I will say that I'm more sensitive to this, I feel now. So I think that's already paying dividends from reading that book, even if I didn't explicitly meet the definition of done for this specific follow-up item.
It's really hard to measure done on a change of mindset.
It is. We should create a new format for these follow-up action items, because I feel like those are the ones that provide me the most value from the books that we read for Bookworm,
Yep.
but they really don't fit the format at all.
What was it? So Benjamin Franklin did that. Was it Franklin who had the list of virtues that he was trying to track whether or not he was doing well with those?
Yep.
It feels very much like that, where this isn't a yes or no, it's a scale, it's a spectrum, if you will, where you're kind of trying to keep an eye on how well are you doing with something. So you'd almost have to have a list of these and then just rate yourself on them on a regular basis.
I kind of do that with the daily questions. It's not explicitly values or virtues like
Sure.
Benjamin Franklin, but it's the things that are important to me. So
Right. It's that concept, though, right?
Yep.
I don't know. It sounds like we're going to talk more about that in our next episode, though. So there's that.
Perhaps.
Teaser dropped. Okay, can we talk about today's book now?
Let's do it.
Because this one could get long. So today's book is How to Change by Katy Milkman. And Katy is a colleague of Angela Duckworth. We read her book, Grit. Is Duckworth wrote Grit, yes. And Katy is a researcher alongside her that works with a lot of the same type of behavioral science research. And Katy has taken a lot of that research and picked apart a lot of the, I would say, like difficult, I don't want to call them personality traits, but habits, I guess, bad habits, if you will, that we all do in some form at different levels, and then shown the science of how to overcome those. And in some cases, I feel like she's speaking to my soul and the part of me that I don't want anybody to know about. And the other part of it's like, wait, does that work? I think you're crazy. I don't think that's actually a thing. So there's a lot of this back and forth that I found myself going through. There are a handful of these that I feel like could be described as the same thing. And I think I'll talk about those to some degree when we get to those. But yeah, I think this is an interesting book to take the science and research side of how do you actually make these changes and build habits and such. That's probably a stretch to call it a habit building book. But anyway, you get my point. There's a lot of these things that we could work on being better. Just how do you do that from a science stance?
Yeah, I don't think it's a stretch to call it a habit book because it is talking about behavioral change, which is what the power of habit, atomic habits, and tiny habits all referenced, but it's not like those books.
No, it's not.
So, I don't know. I had trouble reconciling that, especially the way this one started.
Yeah, so this one, she starts off with a chapter called Getting Started, which the introduction and stuff, I think there was a foreword written by Angela Duckworth too. But there is a Getting Started chapter where she tells her story about going to the Google headquarters and then being asked a question that she had a hard time understanding and getting an answer to right away. And basically what was going on is Google was offering a lot of skill building classes and free things like trainers and such, and people were not taking advantage of these things even though they were free. So it wasn't a financial thing, but yet people still weren't taking advantage of these deals that would help them change for the better. So then the question was, well, why? But this whole first chapter, I feel like, is just a primer of saying, like, here's how my research started. And that was about it. That was all I got, really, out of this one. There's some jumping off points that come from it. Like, she talks about fresh starts, like when you hit a point in the road in your life where something is completely different. You have a job change, you have a baby, you get what I'm saying? Like, you have these points in time when big changes happen. It's the perfect time to introduce new habits, new changes, get rid of bad things, bad habits and such. Like, that's a really good time to do that because you have the motivation and things are already changing at that time. She gets into a little bit more of that. But anyway, thoughts on this first one, Mike?
Well, the first chapter kind of rubbed me the wrong way because she essentially is making the case for New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring that up. I figured you would. But yes, she absolutely thinks that New Year's resolutions are potentially a very good thing.
Potentially. I mean, we've all heard the statistic that 90% of them fail. And she embraces, which I think is a clever argument. Well, that means that 10% of them are successful. So even if you have just a 10% chance of changing your life, isn't that worth it? And hard to argue with that logic, but I don't think it's very sound because the alternative that is being disregarded if you make that argument is, could there possibly be a better way to affect behavioral change? And I think 100% there absolutely is. So given the option of New Year's resolutions or nothing at all, yes, choose New Year's resolutions. But as soon as you introduce an option C, whatever it is going to be better. So I understand her point, and I think it's valid that, the reason that people gravitate towards these New Year's resolutions is because of this fresh start effect that you had kind of talked about. And the larger point, and one of my action items already in this first chapter, is to find more opportunities for those fresh starts. There's nothing magical about January 1st other than it's convenient as people are flipping over their calendars. And so it's easier for people to attach maybe to that specific point as a fresh start, but there's no law that you have to do it then. You can do it whenever. So look for those opportunities where you have those moments that can trigger a fresh start, whether it's a job change or having a kid or moving to a new city. I mean, there's lots of things that can trigger those fresh starts. And I walked away from this first chapter thinking, these are probably all around me, and I should just start looking for these more frequently. Even beginning a new week, that's potentially a fresh start. It's maybe not as a substantial fresh start as a brand new year, but ultimately that's just mindset stuff. If you viewed it as this is a brand new beginning, then it is the same. There's nothing special about a specific date. So figure out where those points are in your own life, and then leverage them to hopefully make some better choices and some positive changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, you can, if you use, let's use Carol Dweck here, growth mindset. Like, if you use that mentality of always trying to get better, like, you can hunt for these fresh starts. And that could be, like you're saying, it could be at the beginning of the week, could be the beginning of the month, it could be the beginning of every day. Like, that's something I know I've tried to do. People talk about, like, every day is a new start. Like, well, you're right, but it's tough to actually think about it that way and then make changes as a result of that. Like, it's not as simple as it's a fresh start, because it happens so often it doesn't feel like it sometimes. So, like, I totally get that. But one of the things I also wondered was, like, okay, every time we finish reading a book, you and I sit down and talk about this. Like, it's that moment in time where we kind of have another start point. Like, you have another change point that happens there, because you've just finished debriefing a book. You've got all the nuggets from it at this point, or maybe we gave some to each other. I'm not sure how I feel about this whole Mike giving me tasks on Bookworm thing. That's becoming a habit, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. So, like, that is a thing that happens as well. So, like, you get all the new information. When you have that influx of information, that can also be a new starting point. Like, even if you did a bunch of research online and learned about, I don't even know what, koala bears. Like, there may be something about koala bears that strikes something in you, and, like, that moment could be that starting point for you.
Yeah, they're literally all around us, and I think using those as springboards is a very powerful mechanism for positive change. I just don't like how it's wrapped up in New Year's resolutions are actually a good thing.
Yes.
You lose a little bit of credibility in my mind when you make that argument.
Yep. Yeah, that was when she starts talking about how great New Year's resolutions are. I'm like, okay, this book is going to go very differently than I thought it was going to.
And it's interesting because prior to reading How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler and the whole idea of syntopical reading, had I not understood that, I probably would have approached that argument a little bit differently. I probably would have said, well, let's just get to the end and see how this all ties together.
Right.
And then I'll decide for myself whether this book is for me. But as I go now, recognizing that this is a discussion with the author and they're making their arguments and I'm responding to them and also slotting it in with all of the other books that I have read, I kind of do that in real time as I read these now. So as I get to that section, I'm immediately thinking about the section that I read from Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits and why that stuff won't work. And I kind of know why it's not going to work. And so I dismiss that argument as invalid right at the beginning.
Right.
The next level for me, I guess, is to not let that influence my approach to everything else she says after that point. I'm not very good at that yet.
Yeah. Because it's colored at that point.
Right.
Or, like, if they're saying things that goes along with what you already have, you have confirmation bias and you tend to trust everything they say. But if they say something at the very beginning that makes you kind of hesitant, it can force you into skeptical mode for the rest of the book. And you may or may not even realize it's happening.
Exactly. And once I recognize that that's happening, it's hard for me to get out of that. I don't know if seems like that has potential to be a negative thing overall, but it's just something I recognize in myself. It's a bias that I have to fight against.
Right. So that's the very beginning of getting started. That's where she basically talks about how she got into her research and fresh starts and how those are good breakout points. I just want to point out, like, if you remember, this has been a number of episodes ago, and we were talking a lot about, like, Joe's daily routine, and I was talking about, like, here's me setting all of this up, but it was because of me moving houses. That's partly why instinctively we know that whenever you have these big changes, like, that's a perfect time to introduce new habits and change the way you're doing things, because you're already in the middle of one big change, and then doing something else is actually fairly minor to add to the bigger mix. So that's partly why I was doing that. Anyway, there's that piece. Chapter 2 is called Impulsivity, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It looks like, okay, here's where she starts to set up the format for the next 6 chapters. So she's got 6 points that we're going to talk about, and she tells a story about the topic, in this case, impulsivity, and then starts giving you a lot of the research and the findings around it and what to do about it. And she doesn't always give you exact tacticals of like, do this every single time you have this, and it'll make it all go away. Like, no, that's not it at all. But she'll give you the broad ideas. But impulsivity, basically, it's what she calls the present bias, which is you're more prone to dive into things that you can see and have the instant gratification from right now, as opposed to working towards longer term goals. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the overlap on the next one. But this one, I feel like I tend to do and call it something else, but I also am not real sure what to do about it sometimes. So there's that. This is one of those, really, you had to go there. You had to start with this one. Why are you striking my soul? Don't do that.
So the big thing I like from this section is temptation bundling. And again, we know about this from Atomic Habits. And Adko brings up a good point I want to address in the chat here. It says, with my philosophy of listening to opposing ideas, looks like that would fit here. And I'm struggling to reconcile the like philosophy differences versus research based, because that's kind of how this book is framed, differences. I guess in my own brain, I've kind of closed the book on New Year's resolutions, and like there isn't room for a science-based argument that these are actually good for you. But then that's the foundation now, the shaky foundation in my opinion, that she's like chosen to build her arguments on in the first chapter. And then she gets into this temptation bundling, and it's kind of a cursory glance into the topic. And again, how to read a book. There's a whole bunch more that could be gone into with this that she doesn't really get to. And comparing it so closely to Atomic Habits is probably unfair. But I have trouble with this approach, like the science-based application of behavioral change, because it's in the subtitle, the science of getting from where you are to where you want to be. And not going deep into these things is causing me a lot of friction already at the beginning of this book.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. I know that like in this particular section, she's talking about temptation bundling, but she also talks a lot about gamification, which we read a whole book on that, and super better. If you remember that one. So gamification, like I know there's a lot you could cover here. And we, of course, read a book about how to do that well, which was not anywhere near, like she doesn't talk about that anywhere near to the level of detail that we had in Super Better. But I don't know that that's necessary in this particular case. But I think I get your point too, because like she does talk about like, here's the problem. And then here are some like research and stories about that particular problem and how people solved it. But she doesn't ever actually summarize that into something cohesive that you can run away with or take away from this. So it gets kind of hard to translate it, I find. So again, there's good stuff here. It's just hard to translate it out of it.
It is. Now the research, I want to ask you, how did you think that the stories that she shared from her own personal research, that they were effective in supporting her points?
Not always. I would say it's about half and half.
Yeah, a lot of times it felt like a theory that was tested with a single study, and the results were not like off the charts, inconclusive, just a little bit in that direction to support the argument. So it was used as the basis for the argument. And I feel like that wasn't super effective. And I'm not in a position to do any sort of research like she was able to do. So take that with a grain of salt. In the back of my mind, I have another book on my shelf, which I need to dig into, though. I've been thinking about this book, Science Fictions, ever since I heard a Cortex episode where Gray and Mike were talking about what they did not like regarding the Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, because I guess there is a whole big movement now which kind of discredits a lot of that type of research that was done because it's almost impossible to reproduce. And I'm not sure I would have had that in the back of my mind prior to digging into that topic a little bit. And I still need to read that book at some point to really understand the full argument there. But in the back of my mind now, I guess I'm kind of a little bit skeptical of any single study that gets cited because I understand the formula for a lot of these authors who are trying to sell books. It's like I got to check a box to show that there was research done, and right. I want to make compelling arguments, but I think getting those two to actually be in alignment is harder to do than it seems. And I guess I'm just at the point now where I can not necessarily point out what is wrong, but can kind of pass the sniff test of something is off here.
I think there's a lot going on in what you just said, because I don't think you can ignore our current cultural state either with that one, because we have so many quote unquote science articles and reviews and stuff thrown at us that, at least maybe this is just me, it just seems like there's so much of that happens that you kind of have to be skeptical about it because there's so many of them that compete with each other. And it's really hard to trust quote unquote science as a blanket statement because there's folks on all sides of it, and they oftentimes want to take an article and the results of the article and then interpret what you should do with it instead of just presenting here's what we found. And that's where I tend to struggle with it quite a bit. Maybe that's just my personal issue, but a lot of the science that she shares here borders on that territory of here's what we found and here's what we think you should do because of it. And I don't really appreciate that much at all. So it's tough to, I think you're absolutely spot on. It's really hard to take the findings that you have from research and then not go into the next step of here's what you should do about it and let people make that decision, because we don't want to trust that people will interpret it the same way that we did. But that's what you have to do. Maybe you don't have to do it. And maybe that's just my opinion. I don't know. But it does, in this particular, if I'm pinpointing what Katy Milkman has done here, I think it's very difficult to trust a lot of the science that she shares here because it feels like she's trying to force some of them. And again, not all of them, but because it happens enough, it makes you question the rest of them.
You're right. It does feel forced. That's a good way to describe it. And there is, it doesn't have to be that way. I'm thinking back to another book that we had covered, which I would argue is very research heavy, and that is The Extended Mind by Dr. Annie Paul. That one seemed to have a very natural progression between the research and the conclusions. I guess this one just feels, I don't know. I guess my takeaway from some of these research studies was I had this theory and I tested it once and I found 10%, 20%, a result. And there aren't other studies mentioned which back that up. Like the way the chapters are constructed, it's like a story which led to an experiment and it's a small sample size and this is what we found. And then it's quickly moving on to another very complicated topic without any sort of resolution in my mind.
Yep.
And this chapter, I think, is kind of where I felt like, well, we're jumping too quick here between like the temptation bundling. She also talks about we think future me is going to be able to make good on choices that present me can't. So like future discounting, that's a really big topic. And then there's the gamification and why that doesn't work. I mean, these should all be separate chapters. And they're lumped together under impulsivity, very loosely connected, and the resolution at the end of the chapters really just does not work for me. And at this point, this is where I start to realize that.
Well, let's go to the next one because it gets worse, my opinion, the clarity side of it. And the next one is procrastination. And as soon as I got to that section, which I had read the table of contents at the beginning, and impulsivity, great. And then she starts rattling off some of these things that they do to help with, fighting impulses or present bias, as she calls it. And we get into procrastination, and she tells the story of like people putting things off or not doing them, and then talks mostly about what people will do to help with procrastination. And there's things like creating locked bank accounts where you can put money in, but you're not able to get things out. So then you're not allowed to, put off your long-term goals. Commitment devices of some sort. Some of those are cash commitment devices. Like, you're going to commit to doing this thing, and if you don't, we're going to donate money to the organization that you are actively fighting against. Like, it's that sort of thing. She talks about sophisticates and naifs, like so many different ways that you could take this. But my point is, like, I really struggled with this because how is that different than impulsivity in my mind? Because yes, I'm putting something off that I want to work towards long term, but that is essentially me acting on an impulse right now instead of doing something for later. So in my head, impulsivity and procrastination are like two edges of the same sword. It's the same thing, but we're talking about it in two different ways, using the exact same like terminology in some cases. So anyway, I felt like it was basically the same title, and so many of the things should have been broken apart, and yet they could have been put together. So weird. I don't know. I struggled with it.
Maybe that's my issue with the book, to be honest, is the way that the chapters are differentiated. Because looking at the other chapters here, chapter 4 is forgetfulness. This fits in with procrastination as well.
Exactly.
And then you've got chapter 5, which is laziness. That fits into procrastination as well. And chapter 6 is confidence. That fits into procrastination as well. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe the better choice of a chapter title, I don't know. It's kind of hard to piece this stuff together. But if I had to pick one, maybe cognitive dissonance, because she talks about the reason why you need these commitment devices, and cognitive dissonance she defines as being at odds with yourself. And I feel that's a very effective definition. But the rest of it, with the story about the banks forcing people to save and stuff like that, I feel like the formula for these chapters is trying to be kind of like extreme ownership. It's a story, a principle, and then kind of the resolution of the story, some tie-up stuff at the end. But it doesn't have a solid foundational topic, maybe. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud at this point. But yeah, procrastination covers literally everything in this entire book. So why are we going to try to speak to it directly in a single chapter? And again, the commitment devices, based on the cash commitment devices specifically, I feel like we spent way too much time talking about those things, and there's still a whole bunch of questions by the time you get to the end.
Yeah, and there's a fundamental flaw with it too, because she never talks about the fact that some people are not motivated by money at all. She makes the assumption that everyone is motivated by having to pay a fee for something, when I know that myself and people that I know firsthand, if there's a fee to pay, if I don't go to the gym, more often than not, I'm fine with just paying the fee. Like, it's okay. It's not a motivator for me. I know that it is for a lot of people. I'm just not one of them. And that's tough for some folks to get their head around. I get that. But it just isn't a motivator. And yet that was a big part of this section, was a cash incentive in some form. I feel, I think you're right with like some of the layout of the book, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here with like the whole style thing, but this is a case where I feel like this should have been a 3-part book. I actually wrote this down beforehand because I felt like it was formatted all wrong. I think it should have been a 3-part book. She should have explained the problems to change, which are this list that we've got here: impulsivity, procrastination, forgetfulness, laziness, confidence, and conformity. Explain those problems, and then give me a bank of the tactics that you're talking about to help solve that. So some of that is like the game, if you want to use what she's got here, the gamification piece, the temptation bundling, all the, we'll talk about some of the, like the reminders and setting defaults and stuff. All of those things could be a bank of all the tactics at the end or in the middle. And then at the end, talk to me about how to make that stick long term.
Sure.
Like that to me is your 3-part layout. But I also know that if you put these titles in a table of contents, it's one of the first things people look at when they're glancing over a book. And if you see a book called How to Change and you see this list of things, this is partly how I picked it. I saw that list like, oh, yes, that. I want that.
Yeah.
And then when you get into it, then it starts to click a little bit. So anyway, it helps sell a book. I know that. So I feel a little bit taken once I connected all those dots. But I'm also aware that the vast majority of people are not going to critique a book the way that you and I are. So I'm aware of that too.
I also think maybe it's personality driven. Like I'm trying to picture a scenario where someone who is not me and who is not you picks up this book, reads the table of contents, and then reads the whole thing and is like, yes, this is exactly what I needed. I'm trying to have an open mind enough to think that that is at least a possibility. And I know we've got our own bias on like the books that we've read and our ideal approach to this topic at this point. But do you think that's possible?
That what? Maybe I didn't understand that.
That someone who is has a different personality than you or I do approaches this as their first introduction to the topic of behavioral change and says, yes, this book is great.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. And this is why, like, if you look at, the outline I put together that connects like all these different chapters, and I put like the subheadings underneath of it, which is probably similar to what some of your mind node stuff is. It has a lot of like the tactics for that thing and how to work towards that. I think if you don't have the background that we do or this growth mindset piece like we do, I could see where this is maybe the right way to do this. So I want to temper some of my thoughts with that because I know that like this could be the right format for people. Because if you look at it like, okay, impulsivity, what are some things to help you with preventing instant gratification desires? And if that's what you're working towards, then yeah, that's it. Technically, I think you and I would both say that those fall under the procrastination world. But I think she's trying to differentiate that because of the different types of tactics that she's using to fight against different forms of procrastination, maybe, and different like, underlying drivers for it. Like if you went on to the next one, forgetfulness, she talks about using time-based reminders. You want to be reminded as close to the thing that you need to do as you can because you'll forget. You need to use cue-based planning, having something in place that will help you plan for the future, and it's a cue to do that. A memory palace, she talks about, we talked about that before, using checklists, like these are helping you to remember to do things at the right time, which again is a piece of procrastination as well, but it's a different form. So maybe that's what she's driving towards. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could interpret this, I think.
Talking about chapter 4, she mentions that the average adult forgets 3 things each day. And then she gets into some of the stuff that you were talking about. And yeah, this ties back to procrastination. My dominant thought as I was reading this section, though, was that all of these tactics are dealing with the symptom, not the disease. So I couldn't help my mind wandering into, well, the fact that we are so forgetful and we're forgetting all these things is really a product of our chaotic environment. And again, hard to separate at this point from the other books that we've read on whatever topics, but the one that immediately came to mind was margin. And I feel like if you were to embrace a life of margin and you were to disconnect from a lot of the digital stressors that are in our culture, whether they be social media, news, email, whatever, things that we just by default assume we need to have these things in our life. But if you really recognized that these things aren't essential and you simply eliminated a lot of those things, then maybe a lot of this forgetfulness stuff takes care of itself regardless of the tactics that you try to implement from this specific chapter.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I think if you start putting a lot of the puzzle pieces together, there's a lot that you could. Yeah, so many thoughts, Mike. So many thoughts.
And that is not to say that there's not good stuff in here. Like,
no.
She talks about cues at this point. So again, we can't get away from habits, but it's not a habits book, right? So she talks about the more distinctive the cue, the more effective the recall. That's kind of directly from Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. She talks about implementation intentions, like linking your desired activities to a specific cue. This is all great stuff, but it feels like it's packaged to solve a problem that is not as clearly defined as the other habits books that we have written. I mean, at this point, I'm talking about, okay, so I've got fresh starts from chapter 1. I want to start leveraging those. And then impulsivity in chapter 2, where future me is, present me is a jerk to future me. So temper that. Okay, now chapter 3, procrastination. There's some cognitive dissonance here. How do I resolve that? Number 4, forgetfulness, implementation intentions. You can kind of see like there's no clear connection for these different dots, at least in an effective way that's going to make it stick for me. And that's why I asked the question in the previous chapter, like, do you think there's a personality type where this stuff does connect for? Because I have trouble aligning these dots for myself.
Yeah, and there's a lot of... So I think you're spot on with the personality thing, and I think maybe that is part of this. And it's partially because, a lot of these things could be super helpful for people. I think there are definitely people that this entire list of tactics to help fight these things is like spot on and exactly what they need. Knowing an ADHD brain, there's a lot of stuff here that like, yeah, that's laughable. Like, there's no way. Like, that's not going to help one iota. Like, I know that. And it's not something that I can just use a fun little, have a cue card on my computer when I get there at work to remember what to do that first thing. Like, that's not going to work because I'm going to sit down like, that's in the way. I need to get onto my keyboard and I'm going to set it down. And then in that 2.5 seconds, that thing is gone and it doesn't do me any good whatsoever. I'm sorry, Sean Blanc. I know you use the note card thing, but it's not something that will work for me because I just move it. And by the time I get to the actual thing, it's gone. So it doesn't work that way. And there's a lot of that type of tricks here that she talks about. And I know they don't work because I've tried them. So that adds to the skepticism on my part. Now, that said, I'm very aware that a lot of these things I know work really well for my wife. And she uses some of these things actively, whether she realizes she does it or not. And if she were to read this, I'm sure there's a lot of this. Well, yeah, of course. How would you get anything done otherwise? Like, that's probably her perspective on some of this. But I'm digressing here. But I think you're right. There's probably a little bit of a, what is your tendency towards different types of prompts? And are you skeptical about following through on them? I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, and I know there's going to be different strokes for different folks. One book that is currently being written that I am fascinated to get your opinion on is, I think it's called Refocus, and it's by Jesse Anderson, and he's still working on it, but it's basically an ADHD approach to to productivity. And that was kind of the one of the light bulb moments I had was his atomic essay about eat the ice cream, not the frog, and recognizing that there's going to be different things that work here for different people. So I guess, yeah, you're right. We have to just keep iterating that this is our personal opinion and it's quite possible that this works for other people. But that being said, yeah, it's not working for me at this point.
Yeah. So I guess to get back to the book here, like we're on forgetfulness And some of the things she talks about that do work for people is setting time-based reminders. This is one that I wrote down that I'm going to try to be better at, especially using like the Do app where you can get the nagging reminders. Setting that to go off at the time at which you are planning to do that thing can make a big, big difference. So that's similar to like the cue-based planning, because she tells stories of like they remind people to do things at the moment that they're getting into the car, or you're like you want to learn to like floss your teeth and not forget to do that. Well, having the cue of doing that while you are brushing your teeth can help with that. So it's that type of thing where you're trying to set up those cues and such. Obviously, the one in this list that I thought was spot on was the checklist piece. Like, oh yeah, if you have all big bank of things, it's really hard to remember how to do. Guess what helps? A checklist.
Yep.
There you go. I'm totally on board with you on that one, Katy.
On the topic of the cues, I wonder if there's a point of diminishing returns with this, because you mentioned specifically a cue with the Do app where it's a nagging reminder. But that sounds to me like a plan, and having too many plans, she points out, can be overwhelming. So I wonder if it would be more effective to just think about how you can make modifications to your environment so that it automatically happens that you do these little things like flossing your teeth or whatever, which again, I feel like there are other books that speak to that better.
Yes, but this is one book and not a bank of books. If it was intended to be a bank of books, you wouldn't have this one.
That's true. That's true.
So there's that, which if we keep moving here, we've got laziness, which is the next one, different form of procrastination. And she has a few different ways that you can combat that one. Setting defaults was the first one she talked about in this chapter, which you and I have talked about before. This is a big deal. Like if you change the defaults for how something or when something is going to happen, it happens way more frequently and makes things a lot easier. Like if you have, different apps that will automatically open to your task list whenever you open your computer to begin with, like that sort of thing makes it way easier to avoid distractions and such. So like that sort of thing, setting those defaults is a big deal. I don't know, anything you want to say on that, Mike? I've got a few others here I can talk about.
The one thing that stood out to me from this chapter was the emphasis on the flexibility. So that in certain scenarios can be more important than a routine in terms of getting a habit to stick. And I feel like I've embraced this with my running habit because there's not a specific time that I go for a run a couple times a week. I just know basically the day, and then the day of, I'll slot it on my time block plan, but I recognize that as I'm working on things, I'll hit a point where there's diminishing returns in terms of my ability to create or think about something. And then I just kind of automatically am like, okay, that's the time I'm going to go for a run.
Yeah.
Whether that's earlier, later, because sometimes I'm in the zone and just things are flowing. And at that point, I'm not stopping to go for my scheduled run unless I know that that's my last window for the day. But I feel like I would not have a consistent running habit if I had tried to be rigid with it.
I feel like, she does talk about habits and then talks about flexible habits, like you're saying. And maybe this is just me, maybe it's just my brain, but the concept of having a habit that I do every single day that doesn't have a set like routine to it, and it's just something I make sure I do every day, guess what? Those never happen. Never, 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 never. Like if you told me that I wanted to make sure that I was reading a book every day, but I don't have a set time that I'm going to do that, I just want to make sure it gets in that day, it won't happen at all. I will always move on to something else, and it just doesn't click ever. And I don't know specifically why that is. Maybe that comes back to the impulsivity and procrastination piece. I don't know. Some of it's forgetfulness. Like it ties into some of those. It's not like I'm trying to put it off intentionally. It just, I find other things that fill that time very quickly. And having the set times for those pieces is what makes sure that they happen. Like I know first thing I'm going to do after I've cleaned myself up in the morning and gone to the restroom, like I'm grabbing a book and I'm going to go sit down and make a cup of tea. Like that's what I do. So every single morning, that's when that happens. Otherwise, I'm not going to take the time to sit down and read throughout the rest of the day because it gets too hectic and too crazy, and it's just not going to happen.
I can see that. And I think there are examples from my own life too, where there are other habits that, like you just described, I need to schedule them or they are not going to happen. And I don't know how to tell which ones I need to be flexible with and which ones I need to be rigid with. There are probably characteristics of those that I could identify if I knew where to look, but haven't figured it out yet.
A couple of the other things she talks about here is like nudging, where you can like make it easier to do the thing that you want to do. She told a story about getting a hospital to, I guess that was on setting defaults, but getting a hospital to prescribe more generics instead of name brand medications, and how they actually fixed that because the tech guy decided to push an update to how the prescriptions were sent off and had it the generic tick box that was, or had the name brand box that you had to check to get the name brand prescription, and it was off by default. So then you had to turn it on in order to get the name brand, and it dropped their name brand prescriptions. I don't even remember how much. It was almost non-existent for name brand afterwards.
Yeah, see, this is the example of the type of research that kind of irks me with this, because the way she tells the story, it's like it was way over here, and at the end, after they made the change, it was way over there.
Yep.
And on a scale of 0 to 100, we went from 0 to 100.
Yep.
And you framed it just like she did.
Yep.
Afterwards, almost everybody did it. 98%. But I believe the percentage at the beginning of it was 75%. Sure. So it's like a 20% change, not a 90% change.
Yep.
Which, again, like that's a movement in the right direction. And I'm sure it saved them a ton of money. But maybe there's a more powerful example to be had there. Seems like there would be. I feel like this is the kind of thing that Atul Gawande would talk about in like the Checklist Manifesto. And maybe I'm misremembering that book. Maybe that was similar results between this is where we were before checklists, this is where we were after checklists. But I remember walking away from that book feeling like checklists make a huge difference. And this is like, well, yeah, we made a change that we actually went around the rules in order to do, and it moved the needle a moderate amount.
Yep. Yeah. Those are the ones that it's a 95% change, which means that like what they're actually talking about was it moved from 10% to like 19% is the way that they're framing that. And yes, that could be qualified as a big deal, but depending on what the thing is you're talking about, it's actually fairly minor. Could be. And that's a lot of what I think you're getting at. Like you have to be careful. And maybe this is the skepticism we're talking about. Like when people are throwing science at me, quote unquote science again, the whole, what the numbers are, maybe this is the data analyst in me. Like I always assume those numbers are inflated or tweaked until proven otherwise. Because I know they're playing games with how they're talking about them almost all the time in order to make the point they want to make. And I'm not saying that that's what Katy's doing intentionally here. I just think that's the norm. And if you follow, well, even in her book, she's got this piece conformity. Like if everybody around you is doing it that way, that's what they're going to teach you to do. And that's what you're going to be led to do.
And I want to say right here that I think part of the thing that attributes to that effect is actually a positive trait where it seems like she is trying very hard to establish credibility, but also express humility. I mean, she's talking about, I got the chance to go talk to Google, name dropping like these big companies, but that doesn't really rub me the wrong way, the way that she did it, because she's trying to establish credibility. And if I were her, I would probably do the same thing. But then she also balances it with like, I did this with Angela Duckworth and I did this with these other people. And it always feels like trying to qualify some of the statements. And I know there are books that we read, and they are probably typically male authors who just assume this authoritative tone and like, this is the story and this is the big conclusion. And they might have taken a very different approach to some of these same studies, and they would have made these grandiose claims and they would have just told the same research, but told the story differently and would be very different in terms of how it comes off to the reader. And I'm more sensitive to that stuff too. The people that kind of fit into that category for me, which I recognize now, having read a bunch of books, they do kind of rub me the wrong way, are the people like the Grant Cardones and the Tim Ferrisses and the Gary Vaynerchuks. Yeah, exactly, Blake. It's mansplaining. Absolutely. There definitely exists in the productivity self-help genre. And so I want to clarify that, but also I feel like maybe Katy needs the same advice somebody gave me one time. It's like, you don't have to attribute all this stuff to other people. Like, you have the ability to own your own thoughts about things, right? So I don't know. This is a difficult concept, but I guess what I'm saying is, even though the net effect of the research in these stories leaves me with more questions than answers, I also feel like it's coming from an attempt to be authentic and not present yourself as the expert who knows all, and that I definitely appreciate.
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk, the way that she's presenting this, because I think her very first story at the very beginning, getting started, where she's talking about, I was new. I went to Google. I got asked this question and I didn't know what to do with it. Like, that is really good, the way that she presented that. When it gets repeated and it comes up over and over and over again, and she talks about, yeah, we went to this company, we went to that company, and we got called into this, and this is a high up person, and like, that happens a lot. And it's not that she's trying to be like, this is me. It feels like it's a bit of bragging. At least that was my take on it. And I get what you're saying. Like, there's some sense of like using that to build credibility. But her very first story, she did a good job of like, I didn't feel like I should have been there. She made that comment on that one. That was the only one she made that comment on. And I know that because it tripped me on the very first one. Like, she did that well. Like, I remember that. The very beginning, she made that comment. And then she never did it again the whole book. So,
well, I'm gonna defend her a little bit here, because put yourself in her shoes, and you are writing a self-help book.
Yep.
In this environment, you have to approach it that way.
Correct. Yeah.
Because
it's tough.
Yeah. So I'm willing to give her a pass for that. I agree that it feels a little bit weird, but also it feels like something that she just has to do.
Correct. I think what I'm trying to say is, because yes, you are correct, and I want to give her that pass. I think what I'm getting at is, like, I don't think it was written the way she intends it.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't think it came across the way she's intending it to come across. And that could be a factor of like our background, or maybe I'll use me. Like, I don't know about you, but my background and what I've interpreted from how other authors do this, like, that's the way I took it, because I don't feel like she articulated her intentions very well on that one.
No, I agree with that. I think this is the first book where I don't really enjoy the book, but I feel like I would really enjoy getting to know the person.
Right, absolutely. Like, because I'm with you 100%. There's so much of this is like, I really want to go hang out with Katy. Like, as weird as that is to say, like, yes, we're giving her tons of grief here, but I really want to go hang out with her. Like, let's go talk about this, because I feel like I have lots of questions, and I feel like we could have a really fun conversation. We could learn a lot, because I just think that what she knows and what she's been able to articulate here are kind of two different categories. Like, I feel like what she's learned from her research and how she's been able to do things and how she can help other people do that is really great. I just think there's something off with how she articulates it in written form.
Agreed.
Okay, laziness. We keep divulging. Maybe that's my fault. Diverging. Pick the right words. That's the point. That's the moral of the story. Pick the right words. I'm not good at it.
Words are hard.
Correct. Words are very hard. So we talk about laziness. Then we talk about confidence. Now, this is where I think, you made the comment that these are all kind of a form of procrastination. I think this and the next one both break that mold. So there's impulsivity, procrastination, forgetfulness, laziness. Those four, in my brain, I can get those into procrastination. Confidence, I feel like, is very different. Again, maybe that's just me. And I say that because it doesn't feel like the sort of thing that leads me to putting things off, because I know that like I'm very confident in some areas, but I'm also very hesitant in other areas and feel insecure in those areas. So again, it depends on the realm we're talking about. But confidence, I don't, and maybe I'm just thinking about it wrong, but I don't think of that as something that could be lumped underneath of procrastination. So maybe I need you to explain how you got there with that.
Well, I guess there's a couple things. One, from this chapter, she talks about once we offer advice to somebody else, we feel like we need to follow it. So it could be that we know the right thing to do and we procrastinate on doing it. And then once we tell people, oh, you should really work out 3 times a week or eat healthier, then all of a sudden we're able to overcome the procrastination and work out 3 times a week or eat healthier. She also talks about self-efficacy in this section, which is a person's confidence in their ability to control their own behavior. And I feel like if you developed your self-efficacy, you would be able to follow through on the intentions that you set and overcome procrastination. I don't know. I guess that connects the dots in my head, but there's probably another way to connect those same dots too. I will say I like this chapter. I like the suggestion to create a mulligan plan for exercise. I put writing. That's one of my action items here, not specifically for writing, but like the different areas in my life where I want to do this consistently, but it's not an everyday thing. I want to figure out what my mulligan system is, because tied to this idea is if you start the week well, you're more likely to follow through and finish well. So the idea of the mulligan is like if I'm going to, work out 3 times a week and I do it Monday and Wednesday, I've still got that. I do that because I don't want to burn up my mulligan at the beginning of the week. But once I do it at the beginning of the week, it's more likely that I'm not going to need to use it at the end. Does that make sense? Did I explain that okay?
I think so. I think if I couple what you just said with what Blake just put in the chat, so if I follow that, if you're not confident in the task, I'm coming up to a higher level than what you were just talking about. If I am not confident in doing the task, I'm more likely to not do it. So is that a summarization of what you're saying?
Basically, but lack of confidence in doing the task could be manifested a lot of different ways. Okay. For me, it's not a lack of confidence in my ability to sit down and crank out words, but maybe it's my lack of confidence in knowing what I should be writing about, because I haven't taken the time to articulate what the prompt is going to be and gain clarity on the task at hand. I mean, there's a lot of productivity advice that talks about project management, breaking things down into bite-sized chunks so that you are confident that you can take action and finish them. Or just having the clarity of the path forward for the thing is often enough for me to follow through. When I have this general idea of this thing that I need to do at some point, I kind of just put it off and I can figure that out later. And then I wait too long. It's down to the deadline, like force myself to sit down and figure out what really needs to be done for this. And then I kill myself to get it done because I'm working super hard right at the end. But gosh darn it, I'm going to get it done because I committed to it.
Right. So one of the things that she mentions to help build confidence is giving advice to others on the topic that you're struggling with confidence in. And I think this
feels really weird.
It does. It's so backwards, but I will never forget there was a quote in a movie's called Luther. It's about the life of Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther. And he, in the movie anyway, his mentor made the comment that we teach what we need to learn best, was the way that he put it. And yeah. I don't know if that comes from elsewhere, but that was the first place I've heard it. So we teach what we need to learn best. And I know this because I've talked to enough of them, but bloggers and podcasters and YouTubers and such, like people who work in the creator economy, just in general, apply that to the max
This is
Just knowing
totally
that.
me. My entire career is built on this. And it's a
Yes.
fine line to walk where you are saying, I am figuring this out and this is what I've
Yes.
learned, as opposed to coming across as the expert and this is what you need to do.
Correct. Yep.
But I think if you can figure out how to do that authentically, and really for me, it's just framing it that way, is like, these are my experiments and this is what I'm learning. Try it on for yourself, see if it works. But once you figure out how to do that, that's the only way to do this. Sean
Right.
McCabe would say, teach what you know, right? But what you know is what you just figured out and are most excited about.
Correct. And Gary Vee would call it documenting instead of creating. It's like, let's
Sure.
just document what I'm doing right now instead of trying to package it up in something neat. But again, like if you look at creators online, most of what we do is give advice on how to do things. And in one form, like it's to help the people who are able to listen to us in this case. And on the other hand, it's to help us gain the confidence we need to follow through on the thing that we're giving advice about.
Maybe the differentiation that needs to happen here is just getting rid of the word advice, because
Sure.
advice feels very prescriptive.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I mean, there's so many different ways we could take that one. But yes, I feel like a lot of what people do online is like, yes, they teach, and it's some of it so that we can learn ourselves, or we're teaching what we're in the middle of learning. And I don't know if other people do this, I know, but I know that in my case, whenever I teach something online, it's usually like, okay, I'm going to teach people how to do this type of scripting, or how to make this script work, or how to, let's use an OmniFocus example. Here's how you can do scheduled reviews in OmniFocus. Like, I'm going to teach people how to do that. How do you do that? I have no clue, but I need to do that. So I'm going to commit to teaching people how to do that. That way I can figure out how to do it. Like, that's
See, even the word teaching sounds better than giving advice, in my
sure.
opinion. Because it's, I don't know, you're authentically trying to help somebody as opposed to just solving a problem for someone.
Right. And I even if you use the word consulting, like whenever I've done even paid consulting, I feel like I learn an awful lot about myself whenever I'm consulting other people on what to do. Like, it's so weird, so backwards. But yes, it does work that way.
I guess maybe my pushback on this specific thing would be to reframe this. Once we offer advice to someone else, we feel the need to follow it. Even something as simple as once we teach somebody something, we feel like we need to follow through on it. That seems like a less abrasive way to say that.
Yeah, for sure. The other one she talks about here under the confidence umbrella is the growth mindset. You can't get away from Carol Dweck no matter where you want to go. And she comes up here again. So not a bad thing. But anyway, if you have that growth mindset, it helps you build your confidence in that area, because you know you can always learn more and you can work towards that. That's my summarization of it.
Good summary.
Anything else on confidence, Mike?
Nah, let's go on to the next one.
All right, so the last one here before we get to like the wrap-up chapter is called conformity. It's just what it sounds like. Following social norms and doing what other people are doing is the thing to change, I guess. But you can take advantage of that and do things for good, not always like just sticking to the pattern of, herd mentality and such. One of those that I thought was interesting, and this is not to keep bringing up the productivity space, but this is definitely something that comes up a lot. The concept of copy paste on habits and actions and methods.
Yeah.
And she calls this out because, like, if you're not doing well in school, find somebody who is and ask them how they study. Like, that's the mindset, right? That's the method. You could apply this to almost any work scenario. Like, okay, well, how are you producing all the things that you are? How are you writing so many articles? Well, what does your writing habit look like? Well, let me talk to somebody who does this and does it really well. That's what you should do. If you want to be a podcaster, well, find somebody who's really good at it. Don't talk to me. Don't talk to Mike. Mike's not good at podcasting. Terrible. Absolutely horrible. Go listen to Focused. It's way better than Bookworm, right? So if you follow somebody who's really good at podcasting and you feel like you're not a very good podcaster, go talk to them and figure out what it is that they do. In most cases, they're probably going to be able to explain to you some of the details of why it works well. Copy paste. I mean, it's just doing that. But so much of the productivity space is built on that, right? We try to share a lot of what we're doing, and then you see what other people are doing, like, oh, I want to try that too. So you copy paste that method into yourself, which sometimes works and sometimes does not. So you have to be a little bit careful with that one.
So I really like this section because if I were to summarize my entire productivity journey, it would be Mike figures out how to copy and paste from other people. Mike gets a job teaching people to copy and paste. Mike realizes that there are a whole lot of people who are putting their definitive stamp on this is the only way to do things by saying copy and paste. Mike going all the way the other way and saying, actually, you have to figure all of this out for yourself. And then coming back, because she articulated it so well, into saying, well, yeah, obviously, this would be the logical place for anybody to start.
Right.
I feel like the copy and paste as she describes it, which is a strategy for goal achievement where you imitate the methods of someone who has achieved it. That is very succinct and doesn't have any of the negative flavor of what I dislike about certain things in the productivity space, which we kind of talked about already today. I don't think this is a bad idea. I think you have to recognize that it's not going to be one-to-one, and you're not going to get the exact same results as the people that you are looking up to. But yeah, if you're trying to do something better, why not find somebody who has done it excellently and just watch what they do and try to imitate it? I mean, imitation is how kids learn. Kids, when they are real little, they can't say certain words, but they hear mom and dad say them over and over again, and then they try to say them, and it's clumsy at first, and they don't understand what they mean, but over time, they just keep imitating, they keep repeating it, and they just keep getting better at it. I feel like there's a pattern here to be followed for the rest of our life with this. So after reading this, I actually feel a lot better about this. And it kind of was one of those aha moments that helped me reconcile this cognitive dissonance in my brain between, like, I don't like when people just profess this is the thing to do and just do this and you'll save an hour a day every day for the rest of your life. But also I feel like it's maybe a bit of a huge burden to go the other way and say, this is just what I did and don't try to copy this because this is only what works for me and you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. If I'm somebody who's receiving that advice and I'm new to this whole world, I might get discouraged by that and be like, oh, I guess this just isn't for me, but you can go a long way simply by imitating something that somebody else has done.
There's a lot of different places you can go with this, of course, but to me, copy and paste is a great starting point, like what you're saying. And it's very nuanced. Like whenever you get into task management, it's probably best to find somebody who's doing it well, who works in a sector that you also work in, and copy paste what they're doing. Like that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And then over time, you'll find other people who are doing the same thing, but slightly different. And you may tweak your methods based on that. And as time goes on, you start to realize, well, okay, here are all the nuances of how mine's different than theirs. And then you start making those adjustments for yourself. And then you start the process of developing kind of your own process, your own system, and it becomes truly yours. And then you can eventually get to the point beyond that even where you start reevaluating the entire system itself. Like we were talking early on about task management and how like I use a task management kind of system, but it's very, very morphed and very fluid. And it sounds like Mike's is kind of getting into that as well. So like between us, like we're kind of coming to that point in the journey as well, where you start like reevaluating entire architectures all at one time instead of what tags do I use for my tasks in OmniFocus. Like it's very, very high level in comparison to that. So anyway, all that to say, I feel like copy paste is a good place to start. It's okay to be in that conformity world as she's calling it here. But it is, definitely a place to get you going. And it can definitely bring about great change if you're willing to embrace that.
Yeah, I think the trick for me, and I'm glad she called this out in this chapter, is the false consensus effect. And this is where we have this tendency to incorrectly assume that people are going to respond to the world the same way that we do. And I think just recognizing this helps a lot for someone in my position who is writing about these things and sharing these things and not wanting to be disingenuous and not trying to profess to have all the answers. I feel like just recognizing this false consensus effect helps mitigate a lot of that. But then also, once you recognize that, feel free to own what works for you.
Right, for sure. So let's go on to the last chapter here, which is changing for good. I don't really have anything to say here other than she just takes a chapter to explain that if you want to get your change to stick, keep playing the tricks, like keep doing the things you're like, whatever if you're using reminders, keep it up. If you're changing your defaults, keep doing that. If you are teaching people how to do something to build your confidence, keep doing that. Like it's basically what she's saying here, which I don't really know how else she's supposed to end this, but that seems to be a logical point to end it on. And just like, okay, that didn't really like tie everything off in a nice little pretty bow for me. Like, come on, you had a chance here. I say that, and yet I have no idea how what she should have done. So I can't critique too much because I don't have a true solution for her.
All right, so let me propose a different scenario here before we get into the style and rating. Okay. How to change The Science of Overcoming Procrastination by Katy Milkman. All right.
Okay.
Chapter 1 is getting started. Chapter 2 is impulsivity. Chapter 3 is integrity. Chapter 4 is forgetfulness. Chapter 5 is laziness. Chapter 6 is confidence. Chapter 7 is conformity. Chapter 8 is changing for good. How do you feel about this book after chapter 8?
Okay, so explain your change from... I understand your overall book concept. What's under integrity? That was the one that you changed.
Everything else is exactly the same.
Okay.
But this is all about not doing what we say we're going to do.
Sure.
That's why we have these commitment devices. That's why the banks automatically will save things for us and charge us a penalty if we don't go over or if we don't follow through with it. The overly optimistic people and their ability to overcome self-control problems through willpower, like this is all about follow through in this chapter, in my opinion.
Yep.
So that's why I branded integrity, but you could pick a different term there and you still kind of see the arc now, though. All of this stuff tying back to procrastination as the big idea instead of getting from where you are to where you want to be.
I like it, Mike, because I even like the term, like integrity. Like it's basically following through on what you've intended or committed to, right? And when I look at, I had the 3 points there, the locked bank accounts, the commitment devices, the sophisticates and naifs, like those are all right in that category. So yeah, I could get on board with that. And I suspect that my opinion of the entire book is probably quite different if that were the case.
Me too. Because looking at the chapter and the arc here, because chapter 8, like you said, this is the big bow on the end and inspiring us to keep going, talking about how change actually requires a lifetime of treatment. Maintaining change is easier than initiating it. You need to rethink your strategies from time to time. This is the call to action to just keep going. But the call to what?
Yep.
The call to fix what? To achieve my maximum potential, to become who I want to be? I don't feel like that's the right call to action based on the content that we got. But if you're calling me to live a life where I don't succumb to procrastination anymore, that feels very much more achievable. So I guess I say that just because having talked through this with you, I didn't realize this until we were starting to talk through this, that a lot of this stuff does tie back to the topic of procrastination for me. Sure. And the issue I had with the disingenuousness really is just kind of a mislabeling of the promise at the beginning of the book.
So this would be, okay, I think what this is a disconnect between expectations and reality, right? Is that fair? Because what we expected seems to have a disconnect from what we've like worked our way through here. And that's not necessarily bad in every case, But when you critique books at the level that we're critiquing them, I think that's a fairly major miss. And I don't know if I should put that on Katy or if I should put that on the publisher, because I suspect, again, like if you follow what I was talking about earlier,
That is a really good point.
if I see a book that says how to change and has this particular outline to it with impulsivity, procrastination, forgetfulness, laziness, and so on, if I see that list and it says how to change, like that's what got me to commit to it. And I'm quite certain that's a lot of what has sold the book to date. But what you're proposing would be a more accurate representation, I think, of what's inside of it. But I'm not convinced that's necessarily Katy's part in the fight. I suspect
that may not even be her call to make.
No, absolutely not. So I think it's possible that there is something else involved there because, obviously she's wanting to get her research out there, and this does do that for sure. I just don't know how much of the overarching format of this was outside her influence. So I want to keep that in mind as well, because I'm very aware publishers have tons of weight on what goes into the final product when an author's writing it, because they're of course trying to sell it. So there's definitely a marketing play into what's in the book as well. So there's that.
All right.
So there's the book. Should we step into action items?
Let's do it.
This will be fun. I didn't mention this earlier on when we did it, but in the getting started section where we're talking about fresh starts, that made a lot of sense to me that those are really good times to make changes and that those are the times to implement those. I know that there's a lot of things that I'm in the middle of trying to change, and I feel like just paying attention and looking out for those could be helpful. Some of those are big scale, some of those are small scale, and I feel like just noticing those would be helpful. No idea how you mark that one off, but it's a good thing to keep an eye on. The other one I wrote down is to be more intentional with time-based reminders and cues, I guess. Because I'm really bad about, I need to do this next Friday, and I can put it on a Friday list. I can put up the reminder for it. I can make a due reminder for it, but I'm not good about picking when that happens. I just kind of set it for 7 or 8 o'clock that morning, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to do that today. And then I get it out of the way, and then it's gone. And then it doesn't happen. So I need to figure out a better way to do that. So I've got those two that I'll formally commit to, but I also know that there's a lot here that we've talked about or we've discussed, but I hadn't really thought about them in this way with a book about procrastination, and I haven't really processed that in that form. So I think I need to sit with this a little bit and see what comes from it. So anyway, I'll commit to those two for now.
All right. I've got two also that I mentioned as we went. So the first one was to recognize and find more opportunities for those fresh starts. I guess in terms of follow-up, I'll make a list of the times that I identify, whether I'm going to use them right now or they're in the future. I feel like having a list of those times would be helpful. And then the other one is to create that mulligan plan. And it's just simply, I'm going to exercise 3 times a week or whatever, run however many times a week. And then if I don't do it on this day, then I give myself permission to take the mulligan, but I'm still shooting for the number of times per week. Streaks does a great job of tracking this sort of stuff because you can actually track, I want to do this X number of times a week. And then once you're done for the week, it completes the habit.
Right.
I don't think I want to track it necessarily there, but I want to actually write out and articulate my plan for the different areas of my life that I want to be able to use the mulligans.
Makes sense. Well, I guess that brings us to style and rating. I don't know how much more I should say about style since we've spent half this episode talking about the style of this book, but I will just say I feel like there's a lot to be gained from passing this through maybe a different set of editors potentially. I think you're right, Mike, in that there's a lot of this that could be just relabeled and the content could stay the same. At the same time, I really want her to spend some more time making this a little more, I guess, connectable would be. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but something that makes it easier to grasp and relate to in a way that makes sense long term. Because there's a lot of this is geared towards like short term effects. Like I did this and it made this massive difference, and then I got that. And it only lasted for a week, or it lasted for a month, or this was over 2 months. Like there was a lot of that, which is why she had to put the last chapter of how do you make this permanent, which was basically just keep doing it. Don't take the prompts away. And it felt a little shortened because of that. It's not a short book, but it just doesn't seem to connect real well. So I'm not sure what needs to change there other than just maybe a slight tweak to how some of the research and stories are shared. We've obviously talked about the labeling piece and how to make those edits. So overall, as like far as a book though, like there's a lot here that I feel like I learned something from. There's a lot of stuff here that's definitely spot on, especially if you're brand new to behavior change. Like this could be very helpful. I'm aware that some personality types are going to gravitate towards this and it's going to be amazing for you. And I envy you in this case. And I just know that there's a lot of this that doesn't apply to me. Knowing how my brain works and knowing that I've tried some of this stuff and it doesn't work even close, like that is something that's a red flag to me. So I'm not aware that I have to watch some of that. So again, I think there's some really good things in here, and I've definitely learned some things from this. The whole concept of I want to get one good nugget out of a book and then it was worth the read. It definitely does have that. Like I'm not like it's not like I'm upset that I picked this to go through. So it's definitely something I'm grateful for having read. Just have a lot of critiques. That's all. So there's just a lot of things that I feel could be improved. That said, as far as how to rate it, if I focus on all the negative side, of course, I could get myself down to a 2. If I wanted to just focus on those 1 or 2 great nuggets, I could probably get myself to a 4.5. Like I could get there. It's definitely not 5 territory. So as far as like what I want to rate this as, I think I am going to still put this at a 4.0. Like I know that it's got a lot that it needs, I find. But at the same time, if you kind of work your way around some of these bigger categories, like and maybe don't get too hung up on semantics on what she titles the chapters, and focus on a lot of like the little tricks and the tactics that she has underneath of those, and divorce them from the chapter title. If you do that, there's a lot of really cool research here and a lot of good little tips and tricks to help you get past some of the hangups you have to making change in your life. And she's not wrong. Like using those tips long term can be helpful. I just want her to wrap it up better. That's all. So I will still put it at 4.0. That's probably a bit of a surprise rating.
All right. Well, I still have my issues with some of the stuff, like the New Year's resolutions. You will never convince me that those are actually what you should be doing. Mike. But that being said, I do feel like there's some good stuff in here. Her style is, I don't think, really my cup of tea. If I was going to have to rate this based off of, my outline and going through it on my own, I was ready to rate it at a 3.0. Having talked through it with you and recognizing that if it's framed through the lens of overcoming procrastination, this makes a lot more sense to me. I would probably rate it at a 4.0. I'm going to split the difference and label it and rate it at 3.5. Again, I think there's some good stuff in here. It really just doesn't tie together well for me. And I don't think you can just discount the fact that the title feels a little misleading and being like, oh, well, it's not her fault. It's the publisher or the editor or whatever. Like ultimately your name is on it. So this is your message, and it just feels a little disjointed to me. There is some good stuff in here, especially viewed through the lens of overcoming procrastination as opposed to forever behavior change. Again, if you're looking for a behavior change book, there are better resources, in my opinion, than this one. But I am really fascinated by the title of Overcoming Procrastination. I don't know that we have addressed a book specifically designed to do that. Maybe that's a hole in the market. That seems like an opportunity for someone to write that specific book, but that's what this one feels like. As soon as I frame it that way, a lot of this stuff, I see the arc now. I can see the flow. I'm not sure if I would recommend this one. It's hard for me to say, yeah, pick up a book titled this, but disregard the title.
This book is not about how to change. It's how to deal with procrastination.
Yeah, I don't know how to reconcile that in my brain. I do think, like you said, I am glad that I read it. There's some nuggets in here that are going to stick with me. The aha moment with the copy and paste, and my issue with the experts in the productivity field and not wanting to be one of those guys. And I say guys because they almost all are guys, the ones that I can picture in my head. I feel like that's valuable. But overall, I don't know, not my favorite book. I want to reiterate, though, that this is the first time going through a book where I didn't really enjoy the book, but I walk away from it being impressed with the person. I don't know. I feel like when I read books at this point, I am not easily impressed.
Sure.
So the fact that I feel this way about Katy Milkman is a little bit surprising to me, but I do think that there is a better story to tell from the research that she has done. And I feel like she is onto something with some of this stuff. It just needs a little bit of refinement in how it is packaged.
Sure. All right. Let's put that one on the shelf, Mike. What are we covering next time?
Next time is Personal Socrates by Mark Champagne. Have you started this book yet?
No. I'm going to pick it up when I get home tonight.
All right. Well, it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to break the format, so we'll have to talk about how we're going to handle that. I have read the introduction, and he shares a story about how he was running this company that had made this app, and I forget the name of the app, but it had a gazillion downloads, millions and millions of downloads, and he was hovering over the button to completely delete it from the App Store, and he was going to completely change his life. And at the back of the book, it says at any point, we are one question away from a different life.
Yeah.
So I love this topic of asking the right questions, and I feel like this is going to be a fascinating conversation, but it'll also be interesting because we're going to have to figure out how to make it work for Bookworm.
Yeah. Those are sometimes fun books, though. I will say, like, I got the book in the mail, and I thought I had ordered the wrong thing because it showed up in its own box. Like, it's got an actual box to go on the shelf so you could pull it out of the box as you're going to read it. And when I got it, it's like, wait, did I accidentally order like a CD version of this? Like, what is this? Like, oh, no, it's just packaged really nice. That's what it is. So that's been my first impression of it so far. So anyway, that one we'll cover next time. Following that, you need to pick up Unwinding Anxiety by Judson Brewer. This one might follow some of the same track we just finished, which is okay. But it's about the subtitle here, New Science Shows How to Break the Cycles of Worry and Fear to Heal Your Mind. And that's, I feel like, something that's been heavy on a lot of people's minds, worry and fear and anxiety and such. And I feel like it would be good to just work through that a little bit together, whether we have our own anxiety that we need to work through, which I know I do, at least some, and also understanding it well enough to help other people with it as well. So I feel like it would be a good one for us to cover.
Sounds good.
Any Gap books, my friend?
I do. I have one called Digital Dollars and Cents by Jody Grunden. I am trying to up my financial game.
All right.
I want to understand accounting better, specifically as it pertains to businesses. So this is a book that was recommended to me, and I'm looking forward to diving into it. I know it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I tend to find books that help me solve a problem that I'm currently experiencing in my life. This is the one that is staring me in the face. So
sure.
I wanna know what's going on.
Yep. Sounds good. I don't have a Gap book this time around, though I'm working on like adding more reading time to my schedule. I feel like I've been running too fast. I need to slow down. That's the way it goes. So anyway, no Gap books for Joe. However, I am very, very grateful for those of you who have joined us live today, and for those of you especially who are a part of our Bookworm Club membership program. We're super grateful to have you in the club. And it's thanks to you that we're able to keep putting this show on and keep buying the books and keep producing these. So we're very grateful to you. And it's not just our undying gratitude that you get when you support the show for a mere $5 a month, but you also get a really cool desktop background, Mike's MindNode files and such, access to a special place on the club, which is like a forum. So if you go to club.bookworm.fm/membership, it will get you there and you can sign up, and we'd love to have you as part of that club.
All right. So if you are reading along with us, pick up Personal Socrates by Mark Champagne, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.